Hello, welcome to our panel this year on writing for younger readers. My name is Damien Hine. I'm going to be today's moderator. Before I introduce myself and a little bit about the things that I've written, I thought we'd start with Sandra and just move down the line. Can you tell us who you are, where you're from, and a little bit about why you want to speak on this panel? Do you write for young people? That sort of thing.
Thank you. Yeah, hi, I'm Sandra Unerman, and I'm the author of a couple of fantasy novels, Spellhaven and Ghosts and Exiles, and a number of short stories. I've never deliberately set out to write for younger readers, but I read a lot that's marketed in those categories. And I know plenty of other adults do too, so I'm hoping to contribute to the panel from that perspective.
Hi, I'm Ian Hunter. I'm a short story writer, editor, poet, poetry editor for the British Fantasy Society, so apologies if I've rejected some of your poems recently. And I'm also a children's writer and novelist.
Oh, hi. My name is Wang. So I was born and raised in China, but I went to school in UK. I got my PhD from Oxford University, and then went to US to work for Stanford University as a data scientist. And also, like, I'm just a passionate writer since I was in the middle school and high school. So I keep writing different fantasy genres and sometimes even fairy tales. And I am writing for younger readers. And my main English work is called Code of Riddle. It is a young fantasy series and sci-fi series for younger readers. So I guess that's
very good. And myself, I suppose I write for young people because looking back at all the years that I've been reading books, probably some of the books that have shaped me the most was when I was about 11, 12, 13. I was reading Philip Pullman, Lord of the Rings for the first time, and in a way I've never fully grown up. So I've still read those kind of books and have had the pleasure of writing some of those kind of books and seeing them published myself, and now get to travel and speak in schools across the country and at places like this. So just building on from that, let's share some of the authors who maybe shaped us the most within young, particularly within the YA, MG kind of categories. Shall we start? Weiqi, do you want to go first and we'll go the other way?
Sure. Yeah, to name a few authors. I'm sorry, I didn't...
Name a few authors who have inspired you.
Well, I mean, first of all, Harry Potter series, J.K. Rowling, right? So that's definitely one of them. And you know, there's a few authors in Chinese market that, I mean, even if I named them, you wouldn't know. Like, they are not internationally renowned, but there are a few Chinese young, like teenager children fantasy writers, and many of them are friends. There's one famous one though. It's called Cixin Liu, the author of Three Body Problems.
Yeah.
Have you heard of that?
Yeah.
He's my friend. So like he's leading an organization, and within that organization, there's quite a few like people writing for young readers in the field of sci-fi and fantasy. So, but yeah, I don't have to name them because you wouldn't know anyway.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned J.K. Rowling. I think I've got an allergy to big books because I read the first 3 Harry Potter books, which were about that size, and then they suddenly became even longer. And I think I'm also allergic to books where the chapters are like 30 pages long. So after The Prisoner of Azkaban, I sort of gave up on them. But certainly the early ones. Also, I'd have to say Neil Gaiman. Some of his books, Coraline and the Graveyard Book, and Terry Pratchett as well. Morris and His Educated Rodents is a really funny book, yeah.
If I go back to the books I was reading when I was in my teens, which is probably earlier than the three of you, so we're talking about the 60s. So, I mean, too many to mention really, but Tolkien, fairy tales, Grimm's and a collection of Russian fairy tales in particular. Someone who maybe isn't so well known these days, T.H. White, The Once and Future King, which is an Arthurian, a revisioning of medieval Arthurian world, which kind of gave me a different perspective on how to write or how fantasy could be written, and I've stopped there.
So there's a deeper question which I'm coming into in a minute, but one more thing I wanted to ask was, often when we talk about writing for young people, we talk a lot about the middle grade and young adult kind of divide. So I wanted to get your thoughts on that. What do we see the differences being? Is it important? Why is it important? Ian, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I mean, I think I have to say that I probably write for the sort of younger sort of age of the spectrum, but I think there is a sort of clear divide, and maybe it's about content and endings in a way, that endings aren't as sort of happy or clear-cut. They're maybe ambiguous, or maybe pessimistic. There's maybe a price or cost to be paid. So a bit more grown up, perhaps. Yeah.
We could go a bit darker once the
Yeah.
kids get older. Yeah. Sandra?
Yes, I was thinking about this in relation to Terry Pratchett and the Tiffany Aching novels, which I wouldn't say are less entertaining or less compelling for an older audience, but are that bit darker and more complex, and maybe certainly have less politics in than you would maybe be able to aim for if you were writing for a YA rather than a middle grade audience.
Well, I think more than that, so young adults the stories for young adults, it could involve some adult elements like sex and violence and bloody things, and but there's a limit. There's a limit. It couldn't be erotica, for sure, but it could be some romantic kind of things. Also, there could be drug issues, because young adult is sort of like a broad term. Like, it could be young adult horror, it could be young adult science fiction, it could be young adult, all kind of like other types of genres mix. So if you're writing a story about young adult school life, that could also involve drugs. But for middle grades, it's absolutely not, I think. Yeah. And also profanities. Yeah.
How much is that because of the expectations of publishers rather than what readers will accept?
Well, you're asking me?
Well,
well, I mean, in my opinion, in my own experiences, I mean, my book is clean. It doesn't have any like that, because I don't want to get in the controversial part of the things where what degrees of violence or sex should there be, right? What degrees of drug use, topic should that be? So I don't talk about that, but I talk to other different other writers in this genre about young adults. They raise the point that I just made. This not from me, it's from them, because I don't write that part.
I tend to avoid profanities in my novels. So I find that when young people are about 11, 12, 13, it might be that a lot of the books are recommended by their parents. I've had quite a few parents personally thank me that there are not swear words in the books, and feel more open about recommending it to their kids, putting it to their kids, because they know that it's going to be fairly safe. So it tends to be that the hardest you'll get in one of my books will be, oh, what the hell, what the heck, what on earth, find ways around it, or maybe you, rather than calling someone an effing something or other, say, you're a dog, compare them to an animal. That's a safe way around it. Sometimes a character might say, oh crap, and then get cut off. And the young people think I was really clever, really smart, because they know what I was trying to say, but you haven't actually done it.
That's interesting. Can I ask you a quick question? Like, the crap is also taken as profanity that could not appear in the book.
Some people would say it that way, yeah.
Okay.
It's certainly not on the hard end of profanities, but depending on how sensitive people are, some people would see it in a difficult way. Yeah.
Because I used to write shit, and then my editor said, no, take that out. So so I thought shit is not even that's such a big deal. But then I used crab, and she said it's okay. But then now you said crab's not.
I mean, my youngest readers tend to be about 8 or 9 years old. And then there's a lot of teenagers, a lot of people in their 20s, and it goes up. I think the oldest person I come across was 70. So I tend to try and think of, what would be all right for a 9-year-old, but also find ways of putting across the force of the emotion, because it's always the emotion and the characters that are most important. So that's how I tend to approach it. I think coming back to the YA-MG split, the best definition I've heard, I think, is it often is about the kind of obstacles that the characters will come across. In middle grade, a lot of the obstacles the characters will find will be in the world around them. Maybe they're going into a dark forest or climbing a mountain or crossing a treacherous sea. Once you move towards YA, it tends to be more relational issues. So it might be toxic masculinity is something that they're dealing with, or maybe a terrible government that's trying to control everybody's lives. So that is one way of defining it, but I would personally say there's quite a blurred line between them. Another thing is often, if you're, depending on the age you're writing for, say you're thinking Key Stage 3, 11 to 13-year-olds, then you want your characters to possibly be slightly older than that, so that people can look up to them but also relate to them. So maybe your main character will be 14 years old, 15 years old. So they're just within reach, but then they're still seen as cool, and or you can put them at the exact age. But if you're looking at 11 to 13-year-olds, and the character is 11 years old, and say doesn't grow up in the way Harry Potter does and a lot of others, then the 13-year-olds will say, oh, this is a bit young for me, and they'll switch off to it. So typically that can be a good way to do it. Before we move on, anyone got any other thoughts? Or we're happy?
I just on the issue of profanity. I mean, I think the other thing that opens up is dating, because if you use words like crap and shit, you're very specifically dating it to a modern sensibility. Whereas if you find ways around it that can not take your reader out of whatever the setting of the world is that you're writing in. I mean, whether it's a secondary world or historical, quasi-historical world, it can be more interesting and more evocative of that particular setting if you can find other ways around that issue, I think.
There is another really popular way of dealing with profanity where you can say, she said a word that rhymed with cluck. and then it goes over the heads of people who don't know that word, doesn't teach them something they shouldn't yet know. But for those ones who are old enough, they think, I'm clever, that's cool. So that can be another way of doing it. The main question that I wanted to get into is, I've been working with young people for about 12 years now, and I'm particularly noticing that we're coming across a generation now where they have seen a lot of things, difficult things. I teach in a secondary school, and yesterday I was in a class and setting them all off on a task. Year 7, year 11-year-old comes to the front and says, "Sir, can I have a conversation with you outside?" And that doesn't normally happen. They normally stay in their seats. So it's clearly something going on. And I say, okay, sure, that's fine. So let me just set them off on their task and we'll talk. So all the students get on with what they're doing, and we go to the door. He's outside, I'm in the doorway, so I can keep an eye and make sure they don't all start talking and things. Turns out that this boy lost his father at the age of 7 years old to COVID. So he's 11 years old and lost his father far too young. And can't concentrate in maths because he left his phone at home, and he's really concerned about his mum. Now, if COVID was one thing young people were dealing with, that would be bad in itself. But, they've seen Boris Johnson, they've seen Donald Trump, there's been a plague of murder hornets. If they're in a school, their teachers have probably been striking. If their teachers work for a public service, they're probably on strike too. it seems like for young people the world is far more chaotic than probably most of the environments we grew up in. So my question is, if we're writing books for this generation of young people, what does that look like? How can we write books that will grip them, that will shape them, and that will have something to say in today's world? I'm not going to pick on one of you to go first, so would any of you like to go first?
I'll go first. So that's exactly one of the concerns why would I ever want to write a series for young people. Because in my own experiences, I've been traveling the world. I've been talking to different people, all kinds of people of different classes, people from different origins, people in different career paths, and business, I do business with them too. So in my own experiences, I kind of feel like all over the world, people nowadays tend to have poor sense of responsibilities in general. When they do business, they tend to lie, do all kind of tricks and try to get away with it. After it's done, they take advantage of you and they try to, just walk away, escape. That happens a lot, surprisingly a lot, and that upsets me every single time. So I was thinking, if we live in such an environment globally, and our next generation grow up in such an environment, it's inevitable that it won't get impacted by this, right? So I feel like the moral standard of people nowadays, not everyone but many people, it's just getting lower and lower. So one thing I think when we write for young readers is to in a way let them know it's not okay to do that. But you don't want to lecture them, because the teenagers is the worst age to lecture. If you lecture them, they do the opposite. So that's why I choose to write a story. There are many reasons I want to write this story, but this is one of the major ones. That you don't tell them how to do things and what you should do or not do, but instead you put your characters in the story and give them some choices. When the characters choose to do something, and what the consequence would be, and if they choose another, then what his destination is going to change, things like that. And for that, my readers surprisingly turns out to be more than half of them are parents and grandparents in the end. I thought it's for young readers, and then they write to me saying that thank you for writing this book, because my kids don't listen to me, but after reading your book, I think they change it somehow. So that just made my day. So I'm saying in my adult experiences though, with all the bad business that I did with these tricky people, I think we do have a responsibility when we write to younger generations. And that is one of that. And to exemplify something is for care people for sure, right? Care your friend, your family, and also animals. And and also environment and all that kind of good vibes. That's important. So when you write, I know that I mentioned for young adults there could be sexual or violent or drug use scenarios in there, but that should never be the focus. That should be it's just by the boundary. Some claim I don't do that. Again, I don't do that. But some claim you can push the limit. I'm not gonna say yes or no, but I don't do that. But I respect that people have different opinions, but that should never be the focus. If you talk about sex or violence or drug use, it should be the negative example instead of a positive example. That's my opinion. But
yeah, I think if you think about it, maybe the sort of writing sort of speculative fiction, sort of fantasy horror or science fiction, it's almost like two sides of a coin, and one side might be to help young people escape from these realities. It might be, if you're writing a fantasy series, it might be to take them away from this reality that they're in. And the other side of the coin is to sort of try and write fiction that sort of addresses or tackles these. So you've got fiction that, because we're kind of almost living in a dystopian future in a way. When you mentioned about killer hornets.
Couldn't look it up.
And I'm a sort of wannabe beekeeper, and I've got friends who are beekeepers who unfortunately we're in Scotland, but down in parts of England you've got hornets, these Asian hornets that are eating wasps and bees and things. But you've also got climate change, you've got extreme temperatures, you've got floods, and that's why I say it's kind of like we're almost in a dystopian future just now. So do you write fiction that tackles these issues of, even you mentioned Trump, political unrest, things that sort of tackle these sort of issues sort of head on, social media, the identity as a person, what it means to be yourself, sort of sexuality, gender, things like that? Do you write things that tackle these issues sort of head on, or do you try and use the speculative fiction to let young people sort of escape from some of these things? And are you doing any favours by doing that?
Yes, I wonder if you can do both. I mean, I think, don't you have to write about something that you care about? So it's no good sort of rationally working out what you think young people need and trying to write about that. You have to develop a story that that means something to you. I mean, again, thinking about what I got out of reading, perhaps to a great extent when I was younger than so I do now. One aspect is I learned a lot about the world, about different places and different times in the past, and about possible futures. And I mean, it's true that young people today have access to the internet and to a whole range of visual media that I maybe didn't have, but, well, certainly didn't have the internet. But you learn about things in a different way when you're immersed in a story. The experience comes alive in a way that it doesn't if you're just watching something or absorbing fact. And so when it works, one thing that a writer can do for young people is bring things alive for them. And I think that's just as true today as it ever was. But I think it has to be something that matters to you, otherwise it won't work.
Anything else to add?
Or try to not write profanities, I guess. But yeah, I'm not very good at managing the level of profanities because I'm not a native English speaker. So to me, crap sounds like nothing. But again, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a difficult time to be writing for young people. But one thing that encouraged me recently was I had someone approach me and they wanted to talk to me about something, and it wasn't quite. They seemed quite important to them. So they said to me, "Look, Damien, I got a copy of one of your books, and I gave it to an autistic boy who didn't have any friends, and I just thought it would be something that would keep him company in his little world because he really, really loves fantasy." And I said, "Oh, great! Well, what did he think? Did he enjoy it? Hopefully." It turned out that he had not only loved the books, but he loved them so much that it caused him to reach out to other people in his school to tell them about the books. And he actually made friends in real life for the first time. So, on the one hand, it's a tremendously challenging time for young people, and they're perhaps having to face more than previous generations have for some time. But books can be powerful. The right one in the right hands at the right time can course correct or can change the trajectory in a really positive way. So that's my hope and prayer to a certain degree, is that books will be fun and they'll have great adventures in them, but also maybe they'll shape the next generation for good in some way. Moving on, we're living in a world where binge watching, social media are bigger than ever. I have young people who tell me that they never watch a film, and yet they'll sit down for 4 hours and watch the whole latest season of Sex Education or whatever it is. And they seem to be, on the face of it, reading less and less. So what is our role with that? Do we need to adapt? Do we fight against it? Is there some kind of middle ground between the two? What's our approach? Maybe start with Sandra this time.
Yes, I mean, I think I've sort of always already partly answered that. But I am someone for whom the written word is always has more impact than watching something on the screen. And I think that is, I still meet young people for whom that is true. It's not true of everybody, but then it never was. But I think all you can do as a writer is draw on the stories that have always been powerful. I think the satisfaction of story patterns and sort of having something that come alive inside your head through the written word is still what you can work with. If you want to write a screenplay, write a screenplay. But if you're writing a novel, then I don't see that as being a different task from when it ever was.
You kind of hope that some of these things that they were binge watching would maybe make them go back to the original source material. I'm thinking of, for example, The Witcher's on Netflix, and I know some young people who watch The Witcher who've got into the books because of that. I think also Netflix is Lockwood and Company, which is a series of books, and hopefully they would get into that. And we've talked about Harry Potter, and seemingly, I mean, because I'm allergic to books that are about that thick with 30-page long chapters, but seemingly in the later books, there's a lot of stuff in the books that never made it onto the screen, or that would have been about 8 hours long. So with the proposed Harry Potter series, you might get people going back to the books. So maybe there's a way to combat it that way, that people who binge watch these things might actually go back to the sort of source materials.
Can I just say, you're right about the Harry Potter books. The first 3 are much better than the later ones. So, no?
My favourite's the 4th, I think.
Yeah.
Maybe the age that I was when it came out, maybe the kind of the idea of the tasks in it. Other things I probably shouldn't mention for sake of spoilers, well, I guess everyone in this room knows the story of Harry Potter. It was the first one where a significant character died within the course of the plot. Lord Voldemort came back. Yeah, I think for me the 4th one's my favourite, and then the 5th is my favourite of the films. But that's a tangent. You go on. Why do you think the first ones are the favourite? You tell me.
Because for the later ones, it seemed to me that the characters just spent so much time feeling sorry for themselves that I got irritated with them. But I mean, this is slightly off point. I mean, I love I read quite fast, so a big book that is going to last me a longer time is something that I love, provided that it's the right book. So I wouldn't want writers for any age to think that they had to keep things short and snappy, just because readers are more used to short books. I think learning to sort of get into a world and stay in it is one of the great pleasures of reading.
Yeah. I'm sometimes stunned by how fast people read things. There was somebody who got through my first book in 3 hours. And I looked at them and I thought, it took me a whole year to write this. This is unfair. Why can't it take me 3 hours to write the book?
But sorry, Aki, but that's all right if you come back and read it again.
Yeah.
So
I asked the question. She did get it. She got the book, and she had memories of it and everything. She didn't skim read it. And it's like, how is this possible?
But I mean, if there's a book I enjoy, I always expect to be reading it several times.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't count the first reading as the only benefit I got from your 3 hours.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, my opinion to your questions is that, you know, I don't know if there's such a saying in English, but in Chinese there's kind of like a big saying about short, fast, and flat. So that's the thing that
maybe we'll say quick and snappy, perhaps.
Yeah, something like that. So like, funny that I'm very against it, but I cannot deny there's something that is, you know, interesting about the, you know, when you say people like nowadays read less and less, younger people too, like they're hooked with mobile games, they're hooked with, you know, short videos. There are something that is attractive in there, I can tell you, because I play that too, I watch that too. I'm against it, I'm not a big fan of it, but still when I open my TikTok, I could stay hours in there. So the problem is really like, you know, it has this unique charm of some sort, which I hope like is not gonna jeopardizing their, you know, our younger readers like reading experiences, but it's happening. So like to answer your question though, I think if something it is there by its innate, you know, attractiveness of some kind that you can't beat, then you better adapt. So the thing is, the world is always evolving, and now there are AIGC, you know, organic, because I work in data mining, I know the AI basics. World has been changing and will be changing and will always be changing. So like, I think I do want to appeal to younger people and everyone that you should read more. Like you should, you know, because the text is always the dentist form in terms of information storage. So like, you know, I wouldn't expand this topic, but text is the basics. But people are so like leaning to like easy like intake. Like if you read text, you have to sit there and be quiet and focus and read text line by line. Whereas if you turn up your app, like, you know, the video and music just come right in. There's no difficulty in taking them. That's why, you know, people tend to do that. So there's not much we can do to stop them from doing that. And then, you know, I would say I would adapt to the modern technology and try to perfuse the valuable part in our literature works somehow into the you know, short and flat thing, so that people will still get a point. But, you know, I think that's probably going to be my strategy, because it's so hard to beat the trend.
Yeah.
Ian, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point, and possibly the way maybe is to, with the sort of particular mobile phones, is maybe to try to write things for that sort of quick, sort of snappy reading experience, and maybe try and hook people in that way.
Yeah.
Because there are, if you see, if anyone looks at sort of market news and sort of market tips for writing, there are sort of some markets that are looking for sort of flash fiction and things like that. So maybe that is a way into someone and sort of create an interest in reading, and hopefully they'll build on that.
Yeah. Sandra, it looks like you want to say something?
You've sort of almost said it for me. I mean, I was thinking, so long as it doesn't stop there, so long as if the interest is created that way, try to think of ways of enticing readers from that to longer work, to the benefits that they'll get from reading longer fiction, which I suppose once you've got them interested in a world, you might hope that if they then see that there are longer stories set in the same world, they would go on from the short things to the longer things.
Yeah. For me, the fun of panels is always Q&A, where we start kind of bouncing back and forth. So I'm going to ask one more question, and then I'm hoping that we're going to have some really good questions from you guys. So, final question is, say someone here was looking to be writing for young people, what are our top tips? Who would like to go first?
Terry Pratchett used to say, read everything. I suppose read, but also try and interact and talk to young people. Because if you're not, if you were saying you're a teacher, aren't you? Yeah. So obviously you've got a daily interaction with young people, but some people may not have that. If you're not a parent or a teacher or whatever, then try and meet young people. You were mentioning that you go to schools. I'm in the Scottish Book Trust Live Literature Scheme, so I go to schools and libraries and writers group and stuff. So I meet young people that way. But try and meet young people and listen to them, but also read what they're reading.
Okay, I'll go. I think, yeah, I agree. And also I think perhaps also talk to their parents and grandparents, teachers and librarians, because my own experience says I have 150,000 readers. Over half, I believe, are parents and grandparents. So like how I know that is because they write to me. So I guess it's a happy surprise. I thought it's tailored towards young readers, but in the end, it turned out to be their parents. And then it all makes sense because their parents get credit cards, right? So I mean that's just what happened. So I guess I didn't expect that. I didn't think that through in the beginning. But then now it happens. When I review it, I thought yes. So you're gonna pass the parental guard, like if you want to write to young readers. So I guess talk to. Well, I mean most of us are parents or grandparents, right? So like, what do you want your kids to be like? Getting nearby or like far away from something, then do it accordingly, I guess.
Yeah, I would say don't limit it to parents and grandparents. I mean, I think I would say write what you want to write, and whatever market, whatever sort of whatever market you're aiming at, whatever publishers label it as, hope to have readers of all ages. And then you will perhaps both enjoy it more, and younger readers will have the satisfaction of feeling that they're being stretched and not written down to.
I think I would say put as much of yourself into your book as you can. When I started on the Half Mark Chronicles, I was thinking, do I try and make it like books that are currently popular, or do I set out to make what I believe are the most epic, most cool, awesome books that I could possibly conceive of and that I would want to read myself? And I decided to do the second. What I found was that because I wasn't trying to chase trends or look at what's popular, the ideas that came out were different to anything else I'd seen. And my voice was in it, my personality was in it, and it ended up being something fresh and original. And I think the second thing I'd say is that when it comes to ideas and characters and plotting and so on, a lot of ideas might come to you. Follow those ideas that put a tingle down your spine. If you can be fully excited about every single part of your book and fully confident in it, then there's a chance it'll be good. And I think the third thing I would say is make sure you are, like Ian said, reading the kinds of things that young people are reading. So, for instance, my original trilogy, written third person past tense, because in that genre that's how most things are. My current new series is very different. So it's not only written first person, which comes from novels like Hunger Games and Divergent, but it's actually written in present tense, which to me is something that I hadn't even thought of, because most books, in my mind, written in past tense. And then I started actually questioning that belief and looking at books that are written for young people, and I found more and more of them are actually written in the present tense. So I decided to have a go at it, and I rewrote the opening scene of my latest book in present tense and past tense, and I sent it out to my group of beta readers and I said, what version do you prefer? Not trying to put any spin on it, just ask them all independently what they thought. And all but 2 of them came back and said present tense they prefer. So sometimes it's worthwhile questioning what naturally comes to us and try something new, because it might be that we find something more effective, more engaging than we've previously been doing. Before we go to Q&A, do you guys want to add anything else? Or are you generally happy? Sandra?
I don't know whether you're going to come back to it. Recommendations? I mean, I wanted to mention, as an author that hasn't been mentioned so far, Frances Harding, who's, I mean, anything by Frances Harding, but I would start with Fly By Night, which has an inventiveness and a playfulness of language that you couldn't get in any other medium. So, you know, a film or a TV series would not give you what you get from her books.
Yeah, thanks, Sandra. I'm going to come back to that. Have not forgotten.
Okay.
So, I promised a bit of time of Q&A. One hand went straight over there. Tell us your name and your question. Before we do questions, one kind of little proviso I want to say is that we are taking questions. If you want to make statements or have a conversation with one of us, we're around, I'm assuming, for the weekend. So catch us in the bar, things like that. Please ask questions, don't make statements. Go on.
Yes, it is a question. It's just one thing you didn't cover on your question before is, I was wondering if you had, I mean, yes, people in general are reading less. Do you have any data about whether people are listening to audiobooks more?
Not personally. I did write down a recent statistic from Johnny Geller, leads Curtis Brown group, that I found quite encouraging. He tweeted this a few weeks ago. He said, according to last year's data, 14 to 25-year-olds bought 61 million books, 18% of the overall book market, and they spent nearly £500 million last year. So people are saying young people are not reading as much, but actually there's significant evidence there to suggest that a good amount of them are. The most popular genres for young people now: romance, crime and thrillers, fantasy and graphic novels. So about audiobooks, I can say that quite a few people have picked up my first audiobook, but I don't know much about the general market. Does anyone have anything they want to add? I think there is a panel at some point during the weekend which is about audiobooks. So whilst we might not be experts, there are some people here who are. So it might be worthwhile tracking down loads of people. Sorry, we can't do one help.
Well, I mean, if you're talking about like listening to audiobook content, reading less, I'm not that worried because that's still a book, right? So what worries me is that they get sink into like mobile games and short videos. That's the thing that worries me. But listening to audiobooks doesn't worry me.
I suppose one thing I've noticed is that some of the young people that I know, it's not audiobooks, but it's podcasts. So it's podcasts about particular sort of subjects. If it's some sort of media person who's interviewing someone else, or it's something to do with history, or it's something to do with environment, or it's a sort of off-kilter look at politics. So it's maybe someone who's been involved in politics who's now no longer involved, but has got that into it. So I've noticed that young people are listening more to sort of podcasts rather than the audiobooks.
Yeah. Sandra, did you want to add anything? No? Okay. Another question at the back there, yes.
How do you deal with an issue, something like climate change in your stories, where it is difficult to be positive?
Yes.
Whereas I think like in terms of, say, of COVID, we are seeing some degrees of harmonization or like the alternative hypothetical, but climate change is an open-ended history.
Yeah. I've got quite a bit to say on that, but I'm going to go to my panellists first.
Can you repeat the question?
So, how do we deal with a topic like climate change in a positive way when it comes to our books?
I don't think you can be artificially positive about it, or simplistic, but you can introduce the ideas that there might be other ways of living. I mean, Ursula Le Guin is a good example, maybe, of somebody whose books don't oversimplify, but who, by giving a reader a sense that there are other ways of living from our own ordinary lives, maybe introduce a positive aspect to it.
Yeah, I think I'm slightly pessimistic. I don't think there is. Maybe there's the only sort of ways like trying to adapt to sort of changing circumstances, and like the changing circumstances would be in an unpredictable climate, or a climate that is more hostile with sort of increased temperatures, and trying to adapt to live through things like that.
Well, first of all, are you asking this question in terms of a fantasy setting or like realistic setting? Because in my book, I do specifically talk about climate change, but it's totally magic based. So like, I don't know, like.
I was thinking probably a scientific setting.
Scientific setting.
Fantasy, yeah.
Well, I need to think a bit about it. I don't know.
So my current book series I describe to people as Jumanji meets Jason Bourne. So there's these board games which things come through from other worlds, and in the first book there is a board game discovered, and they throw the dice, and all of a sudden a full-size fire-breathing dragon turns up in the middle of London, and then there's this kind of secret government organisation that's hunting them to stop them from playing this game. Now, and then as they come to know more of it, they learn that actually our world is not the only world, but one of countless in a multiverse. And then as the series goes on, we meet more and more characters from different worlds who gradually team up, a bit like the MCU. So the second book is not a fantasy world that they're engaging with, but a YA dystopian world. And the world that they're dealing with is one in which basically mega corporations refuse to listen to the government on climate change measures and destroy the world. And so climate change has gone terribly wrong in this world. Meanwhile, the rich have gone to live in the sky on basically flying buildings, which are able to distill water from the clouds so they can have their crops. And the promise was that in time, it would trickle down and everyone would be living in the clouds until the rich looked around and worked out that they would be much happier if they kept everyone else on the ground as their workers. And so, effectively, what I've set up is a secondary world where climate change has gone terribly wrong, and the primary character we meet from that world is the leader of a revolution whose plan is to overthrow the rich and recreate a new world. So I think one of the powerful things about secondary worlds, fantasy worlds, sorry about not scientific, is that we can deal with things on a much more on-the-nose way than we could if we were dealing in the real world. And so through the course of the book, there's quite a lot which is said on climate change in the midst of an adventure story with lots of humour and family drama and all sorts of things going on. So I think it's, when we're writing for young people, actually is really a good thing to be able to look at what are the issues that young people are dealing with and how can we speak into those issues. So, well, I won't spoil the ending of the book, but just to say it's actually perfectly possible to speak on those things and to do so in a clever way which gets people thinking and also has positive things to say. We've got time for a few more questions. Yes?
J.K. Rowling's got Pottermore and she's got all of this fan fiction and she's engaging with her audience in a way that we haven't seen before. Have you seen any of the publishing houses looking to help their authors to engage with their fan base, to turn those readers into kind of like collaborations at all? Have you seen anything like that happening?
I mean, I can say something about that. 2 cents, only 2 cents. So we're actually building a platform to do something like that. So we're trying to, the platform is called Cascade, like Cascade, but substitute E, the last E with 3. So cascade.com. We're trying to, we're trying to invite like fanfic readers or like writers and to collaborate on that. But I don't know if that answers you, like your question by like partially. Yeah.
Anyone else? No. So one thing that I could add to that is that in my original novels, the Hearthmark Chronicles, there's a world called Receiver. In the world of Receiver, a young person will, when they come of age, about the age of 12 or 13, they will leave behind their home and family and go on this journey to a mountain on the far side of the world where they'll face what's called a light spark trial. Many of them don't succeed, many of them die. But if they succeed in the trial, which is normally something deeply personal to them, then they will claim what's known as their light spark, which is effectively like the soul. And so there's different moments throughout the books where different characters make this journey and it changes them in significant ways. And one thing that my publisher asked me to do after my 3 books were published was to do a few other little bits that could be sent out to readers. And so I was surprised and delighted that I could step back into that world. And I wrote the Light Spark trial for one of the characters. It was a significant character, but I had not actually had space to put it into the book. So there certainly are ways to do that. I think J.K. Rowling was in quite a unique position in that the Harry Potter books are so successful, and if you're going to be writing more and more material within a world, you need to have that extended interest, which most writers won't be necessarily in the position of doing that. People will be saying, well, give us a new book, what's the next thing you're doing? But yeah, I think that's my thoughts on that. We've got time for a few more questions. Yes, you've been waiting.
I noticed from looking at grandchildren's games on the mobile and tech, how much violence, excuse me, there is in them, that it's continually zap, zap, zap. Okay, maybe a monster that they're zapping, but it's kind of depersonalized violence in which there's no sense that you have actually inflicted harm. It's quite fun. Oh, I got him. How do you deal with violence in young adult or, to some extent, the lower? Do you include it at all? Because it's very present in their lives if they're using the technology that they have in their home. And does it matter that they perhaps are developing a very callous attitude? Does this carry over, do you think?
Yeah, I'm sure we've all got thoughts on that. Who would like to go first?
I mean, I guess violence is not as bad as like drug things, right? Violence, like, even in Harry Potter, there are violence. It's a matter of how graphical you want it to be, right? So first of all, like, try to limit the bloody sin, right? So, but still, like, even, and again, like middle grade and young adult, they're still like they're different. For young adults, it's more open. For middle grade, you really limited. You really need to limit the bloody part. But in terms of mobile games, because it's all about content control, especially in China. But I'm not sure about UK here, but Chinese government impose like content control, so it can't be. It sometimes they overdo it. So there couldn't be any blood in the whole game. Otherwise, they'll have to like put you offshore. But in terms of story writing, I would say like for young adult, it's pretty much open because everybody was there. But for middle grade, limit the thing.
I know you're going to have things to say, but I'm afraid we are basically out of time. So we've got to wrap up. We are around, so please come and ask us. Last thing, what is the next book for young people that people should read? Very quickly, 5 seconds each.
I've already said Frances Harding. Diana Wynne-Jones is another, anything again by Diana Wynne-Jones.
Whispers in the Graveyard by Teresa Breslin, which is about a young hero who's dyslexic and his father's dyslexic and alcoholic, and there's stuff happening in the graveyard, and it's kind of a coming of age, bittersweet ending.
I'll pass this one to give you more time if you want to name another one.
I would say the book I've enjoyed most over the last year was Ready Player One. Much better than the film. The film changed things significantly. So, thank you so much. I hope that you received something from our panel. As I've said, we're all around throughout the weekend, so do come and chat with us. We're friendly people, I promise. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your weekend.